Hello, welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, you can send questions and comments to our Facebook stream, so hello and good evening, as well as to the YouTube chat running alongside this window. And hello to you. Let's see, as a reminder, introductions. Who are we? My name is John Ruark. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And skeleton crew tonight, we have Jason Richards and Robert Johnson. So, Robert, who are you?
I'm Robert. Robert Johnson. Past Master, Waukegan Lodge, number 78, Total Nerd Bag, and Secretariat's Space Novum, 1183.
If you didn't think he was a nerd before, wait till you hear him talk about philosophy today. And then finally, Jason Richards. Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, Robert's some kind of bag anyway.
Bag of awesome.
Bag of awesome. Anyway, Jason Richards here, past master of Vacation Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, and member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in Washington, D.C.
Excellent, excellent. And just want to give a special shout out to all the patrons who've been supporting the show. If you want to help keep this thing going, go over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable, and that'll help keep this Masonic education up and ready at any time for years to come. So thank you for everything you guys have done so far. It's been a big help. Now, let's see. Last week, we were talking about Platonism. Not Neoplatonism, but Platonism and how it had some influences on Freemasonry, specifically on the cardinal virtues that have evolved through time, and then also through some of the concepts of what do we have here? Really, just the greater forms, ideal forms of what perfection should be, and what class structure we have of characteristics of things, and we always try to achieve this ideal state. So it's always like a striving to find that perfect ashlar in all of our rough ashlars in life. So tonight we're going to continue with the story of Platonism as it evolves over the next 300, 400, up to 600 years later after the academy was formed by Plato. Because as we were talking about the early or the old Platonic school, you fast forward about 400 years, and you really only get to the middle Platonic school, where Origen gets influenced, which leads to a lot of his thought about Christianity. But we still have not introduced this concept of Stoicism. We've done an episode on Stoicism and kind of what that philosophy entails. And so when we finally get to the final form of the academy, which the name's escaping me at the moment. So we had the old, the middle, and then the Robert.
The neither old nor middle.
Neither old nor middle academy. The later part where we're now getting into the post AD era. Then it's actually being influenced by a lot of different schools of thought. It's becoming syncretic.
The Lyceum.
The Lyceum. It's absorbing all of the other philosophic concepts that are coming in, to include Stoicism and others. And so we start to see it start to shift, where even though it's still called the Platonic Academy, the conversation is morphing into something a little bit different that will have trickle-down impacts for a while. And so
and it's interesting, John,
mm-hmm.
As we kick off a discussion on Neoplatonism, that the founders of the school of philosophy of Neoplatonism didn't actually refer to themselves as Neoplatonists. That terminology didn't actually come into play until the early 1800s, about 1827. So these early Neoplatonist philosophers just thought they were Platonists.
They were Platonists,
just taking kind of Plato to the next step.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating point, because it's like the people in the Middle Ages didn't call themselves living in the Middle Ages, right? This is a term that we've added on over a historical review.
Were the Platonists, and where do we live? The Middle Age. Now,
We live in the now.
I have like this weird like Neoplatonist, these guys out there with signs. What do we want? Theology. Where do we want it? Arithmetic.
So, so that's a good transition to this final school of the academy, the final phase of the academy, where we have a key influence of this Neoplatonic thought in the person of Plotinus. What's it? Plotinus? How do you pronounce
Plotinus.
it, Jason? Plotinus.
Plotinus.
Rhymes with
Thomas Aquinas.
Yes, there we go. Not where I was going with it, but cheers to
Thanks so much. Thanks for keeping it clean. Thanks for keeping it classy.
It's a kid's show.
you. So, tell us about Plotinus.
Plotinus is largely hailed as the father or one of the two founders of Neoplatonic philosophy. He was born approximately 204 years Common Era, actually in Egypt, Roman occupied Egypt, and he died age 66. He moved to Alexandria at about age 27 to start studying philosophy. And he tried out a bunch of different tutors and didn't really find a fit until he started the tutelage under the tutelage of Ammonius Saccas, who is widely regarded as the other founder of Neoplatonic philosophy. And he studied under Ammonius for about 11 years. At age 38, he decided that he wanted to study Persian and Indian philosophy. And since Rome was actively going to war against Persia, he figured he'd slip into Persia under the auspices of being part of the Roman army. And so he joined up with the Roman army again at age 38 as they were marching into Persia. The campaign failed and the emperor was assassinated, and Plotinus eventually made his way back to Rome by Antioch at the age of 40. And he lived in Rome or around Rome pretty much for the rest of his life. But starting at age 40, when he moved back to Rome, that's where he established his philosophical school. And he took on a number of students to include the philosopher Porphyry, who we'll talk about a little bit later as connected to Plotinus's writings.
So, Robert, what was so special about Plotinus's writings? What did he contribute to this shift of Platonic thought?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, John.
Yeah. Go to
I'm glad you
Jason.
asked me that, John.
I brought up the script. Oh, there's the script.
So what's interesting about Plotinus, many things are interesting about him, but as he's starting this school and teaching through this philosophical school in Rome, his student Porphyry begins to plead with him to write down his treatises and his lectures, which he and Porphyry end up collaborating on to put together the writings, the edited writings of Plotinus into 54 different treatises. And these Porphyry edited all of Plotinus's writings and lectures and put them into a volume called the Ennead. Essentially, he divided the 54 treatises up into 6 distinct groups of 9 treatises each, and they were they weren't divided chronologically. It was more topically, and so the first Ennead. Let's see. The first Ennead deals with the topics of human beings and ethics. The second and third Enneads were devoted to cosmological subjects and the physical reality. The fourth concerns the soul. The fifth was on knowledge and intelligible reality. And then the sixth covered being and what it is above. So it was actually, Porphyry laid it out in a progression of human understanding from kind of the most egoistic or base philosophical concepts, getting all the way out to eventually the being or the foundation of the one, the intelligence, and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when it comes to the philosophy of Plotinus, he really has, three foundational elements, talking about the one, the intelligence, and the soul. And, he really strove to show folks that all existence emanates from the unity of those three beings, the one, the intelligence, and the soul. And it's by virtue of contemplation that all of existence is said to be united into a single, all-pervasive reality.
Sounds very Trinitarian, actually.
Yes,
Aha!
yes, it's very, very Trinitarian.
Which you could argue then that it actually did have some direct influence in the Trinitarian thought of the one, the creator, the logos as the Son and the soul, so or the Spirit. So there's definitely a more than a correlation. There is some causal evidence of that influence as well. Robert, you wanna vamp on that for a bit? You want to talk about the purpose of this the one, and then the two emanations that come from that, the intelligence and the soul.
Yeah, so if that sounds familiar to a lot of folks in terms of things like Kabbalism, that's because while Kabbalism in tradition has this idea that it is from time immemorial, or more specifically from Eden, the outgrowth of Kabbalah is 11th century, so
Right, it's pretty new.
about like 1,000
Mm-hmm.
BC, CE.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at that in relation to how old these Platonism is, and then what Neoplatonism is with Plotinus, and then about 45 years later, you have somebody who comes along, Iamblichus. If that isn't in your, if you don't know, Albert Mackey spells it with a J because there's the transposition of I and J in I think it's German. I don't know if that's why he did it, but he says it's called
Does he
Jamblicus. And
speak
if you look
only
it up,
in pentameter?
I am
maybe.
pentameter, maybe.
But so
John, if you have to
Iamblichus.
explain the joke,
Oh, gotcha.
loses a bit.
So about 45 years later, Iamblichus comes on the scene, and he's, how do you say this? He basically forms the what I would call the doctrine or the way, and then the guy who comes before him actually is Judas. What's his name? Philo-Judas. Philo-Judas comes along. He's born about 30 years before Jesus, and he takes a spin on Platonism, and then Plotinus comes along and revamps that. But Philo-Judas basically puts forth exactly what Masonry is about, a secret, and what later Christianity attaches itself to, like Gnosticism, like 1 to 300 CE. And then you've got, but like I said, 45 years after. Oh my gosh, my Alexa's going off. So 45 years later, after Plotinus, Iamblichus comes on the scene, and while Philo-Judas gives us the scheme of Masonry, you have Iamblichus who gives us the way.
Right. So Plotinus is in the 204 to 270.
He's in the middle.
And then
Yeah.
And then finally Iamblichus comes later, being born around 245 and dies in
245.
325. Mm-hmm.
And what he did was he established this system where he took Philo-Judais's kind of archetypal dissemination of being the one, and then through these filters, these archetypal filters, all the way down
Everything emanates
to
from the one. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then back up.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it's a circle. Right, this is Alan Watts says you are the universe experiencing itself. I mean, in a roundabout, weird, new agey kind of pseudo mod way, that is nothing but Philo-Judais's thought process. But then Iamblichus is the guy who says, in order to connect with the deity here, the key is an initiation. So what's really interesting about that is this is also the guy who refines the way through Philo-Judais's kind of writings and teachings. He actually, Iamblichus is attributed to writing this book. It's called The Theology of Arithmetic. This is a really wonderful book, Theology of Arithmetic. It's really about mystical, mathematical, and cosmological systems, and it's the longest script written in ancient times that has survived on numbers. And so this book itself, where you could see like the pentad and all of these things, but this is not like a new age book. This is straight up philosophy, classical studies, which then morphs into metaphysics, which is really what Neoplatonism is, right? It's a religion based on Platonism. I think it's been coined as Orthodox Platonism. And I don't think there's probably no other system, because of that influence of emanation that comes out of these thoughts, that has influenced modern theology across the spectrum. Nothing has done it more than Neoplatonism in some aspect. I
In
mean,
what way?
even Christian.
How would you say that?
Well, even in, I would say, the world's largest religions, the Abrahamic faiths, especially, it's more, I shouldn't say especially, super evident in all aspects of Christianity. You cannot have modern Christian theology without the works of these Neoplatonists. I mean, Aquinas. I mean, all of your Christian
Origen,
philosophy.
St. Augustine of Hippo,
Aquinas, yep.
Aquinas, all very, very heavily influenced by Neoplatonic philosophy.
And this is because
like directly influenced, right? It's not,
yes,
it's not
exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so what you have is where Platonism was like material, spiritual, ineffable, but it's a thing and you can visualize it and whatever. Neoplatonism says material and spiritual, but like attributes the Godhead to the whole thing. And it's this emanation of instead of a perfect form, you now have several iterations that lead down to you and then back up. And it makes you, instead of having to, I shouldn't say that, it makes you part of the one, which, gives you the divinity of the man.
Divine spark and all that, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and
exactly.
That stems right back to Plotinus's view on the soul, the idea that there's a higher part and a lower part. The higher part being that immutable, unchangeable, divine piece, and then the lower part being the seat of the personality, where you have your passions and your vices, and so it's really interesting to think about, even in Christianity, Holy Spirit living within you, your conscience, that elevated, deified piece of your being is that higher part of the soul, and then your lower state of consciousness, or your emotions and your personality, is that lower part of the soul.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I just want to drive home the point that Freemasonry in itself, and well, the entire system of Freemasonry could really be said to be just Neoplatonism in a packaged form. The way we
Repackaged.
use things, we repackage it, but it really is Neoplatonic. And even the things that we revere in Masonry, we have all of these esoteric offshoots that are super Kabbalistic, or Rosicrucian or whatever. I don't know if I should say Rosicrucian because I haven't studied that link very well. So, but I'll say definitely Kabbalism historically traced through literal texts, right? I'm not going to get into the basis of time immemorial or whatever. I'm just going to say, came much later than these Neoplatonic things. And so when you got guys like Philo Judaeus who put these ideas out there, I'm absolutely 100% convinced that's where Kabbalism comes from. So if you want to take Kabbalism to an even earlier sense, study the works of Philo Judaeus and Plotinus and Iamblichus. Those guys have really, Iamblichus and Philo birthed Freemasonry before we were ever even thought of.
Yeah, and just to build on that, one interest of mine is Christian mysticism, Christian Kabbalism, and a lot of that has been spawned by a couple authors, the least of which being Pico della Mirandola. And even though he came much later, he was in the mid 1400s to the late 1400s. He was really kind of the father of the Christian Kabbalistic tradition, right? Interpreting this Jewish mysticism and just slapping a big old Christian sticker on it and rebranding it as something new.
Now with 100% more crosses.
That's right. And so, he was definitely a fan of Iamblichus and Plotinus. So we definitely have that relationship there. So even when you look at it in a modern context, then there's an influence there as well. And I think that's fascinating. So it just all of the waves of influence that this Neoplatonic thought has given to modern Christian thought. It's been influenced by Hellenism as well, because I think even Plotinus was a Hellenist at first, right?
He was. Yeah.
He was a Hellenistic philosopher. Then you have the Socratic thought. If Freemasonry is a syncretic system of philosophy, then it itself inherited a syncretic system of philosophy even before that, right? And it's just been adding on more stuff like a Katamari Damacy ball all the way down through time.
Which is interesting, I guess, because we know where some of these guys really studied and ended up. Perhaps, some of these writings like, Iamblichus or Philo Judaeus, those two dudes in particular. Philo was really, he was born in Alexandria, Egypt, right? So what's interesting about that is he's one of the few people we know of who produced works, who lived there and grew up there, perhaps, no doubt studied there, right? And we talk about the loss of the library at Alexandria and all of these things and what could be there, the mystery. But what I think is really interesting is we talk about the idea people will say, well, Freemasonry, various systems, clandestine, regular, and otherwise, will claim a legitimacy of origin of Freemasonry traces back to ancient Egypt. And I don't know that if we really want to say
LOL.
the way, well, we can say LOL, right? Because historically we can say it came from there. If you want to trace historical documentation in terms of wars and conquering and appropriation, sure. But the modern way
or an Enlightenment philosophical return to the ancient mysteries.
Yeah.
Sure. Did Masonry as a speculative order, of enlightened priests exist in ancient Egypt? Or
No.
did we appropriate,
Spoiler alert.
the mysticism of ancient Egypt that was rediscovered in the Enlightenment era into the speculative fraternity? It's very much
100%. Yeah, and I subscribe to the latter of what you said 100%. I see it no other way. But also I also think about, like, if you're going to trace it that way, where does it begin?
Thoth
Well, it
was a
begins
Freemason.
perhaps Jehuti. That's how you say it in Egyptian. Yeah, you have to ask where. You have to ask why. I hope Joe Martinez appreciated my David Childress. You have to ask why or how, or is that why it's from there, right? It's because Philo Judaeus was there and he birthed the idea of emanation, or I don't know. It's really fascinating.
This is where the speculation part of speculative comes in.
Another thing relating to the Kabbalah, one thing I'm really fascinated in researching in right now is the concept of the four worlds and the different planes of existence, and really how you get to transcendence and how do you move up through the four worlds. So then I come across a couple diagrams of Neoplatonic thought, where again we have the one, and we have the nous, or the intellect, and then the soul. But even the soul is kind of the world soul, the greater archetypal soul, and then you have the actual material world that we live in. And when you think about that 4-tier hierarchy, you instantly start thinking about Jacob's ladder, and you start thinking about these different planes that you really have to traverse up into. You go from the material world to understanding your soul, to understanding the intellect, the nous, and then hopefully get closer to the one. Because that's what they teach, is that unlike Platonic thought, where it's just, okay, there might be this perfect form, Neoplatonism explicitly says, there's the one, and the goal is to return back to the one as close as you can. And it is a transcendent philosophy as opposed to a descriptive philosophy.
And that can bring you into the idea where Neoplatonism hates Gnostics.
What?
Yeah, so they used to they hated each other.
But they're one and the same.
Hated
Demiurge and all that stuff.
Yes, but they hated it, right? Because I should say that the Neoplatonists did not like the Gnostic movement, and the reason was because the Gnostic movement said that all the emanation came from the Demiurge, yes, but the Demiurge that was imperfect, the one who creates the world, Yaldabaoth, the Lord of the Sabbath,
was the bad guy, right?
The bad guy,
in imperfect world. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Whereas, right, the Neoplatonists said, "Oh, no, the one is absolute truth. He's the all good. The one, he would never. So nothing bad can come from the emanation.
So my God could beat up your God. That's what I.
You don't want to strive to return to the bad one.
That's
so I can
right.
See how
that's
that
right.
would throw a wrench in their entire philosophical underpinnings.
Yeah, and then what's really interesting though is going further. They basically said, "Hey, you Gnostics, you're bastardizing the teachings of Plato." And back to your original thought, they weren't thinking of themselves as Neoplatonists; they were just Platonists. So, yeah, they were highly agitated at the movement, and didn't agree on God. But who does?
So tell me more about some of the impact that Neoplatonism has had on some of the systems that we're familiar with today. I mean, can you give some specific examples of some either archetypes or thought processes that we can kind of tell that story?
It's hard, right? Because I
Right.
think when we look at Freemasonry, and because we are really, just to tie this back to Freemasonry, the idea is that you have an archetypal system on one hand, and in that same hand, you have the idea of a hidden knowledge that you have to seek after or a Gnosticism to return to the one. And then on the other side, maybe these two pillars of original Freemasonry are these two Neoplatonists. And on the other side, you have a dude who says, oh, and by the way you can create that Gnosticism, the way you can grasp at the knowledge is going to be through a divine connection, through there's a C word. I'm missing the C word. What is it? It's not a connection.
Can't say that on the show.
Basically, you have this divine connection with the deity that allows you to know. That's the cover of this book. I show this sometimes. The Discoveries, Daniel Borstein.
Oh no, when you
This
say
is a really good. Yeah. But basically, you snap your fingers and the tower and the tarot, right? It's the sudden flash that throws away all material to give you the flash of the world beyond, the true world, the divine world, everything. You call that the samadhi, the Akashic record, the whatever. When Arjuna sees Krishna for what he is, millions of teeth gnashing and destroying worlds for the 1 second. So to have that kind of gnosis, initiation is required. And then to Jason's point, you're going from appropriation of philosophical systems and theological systems that just bounces and bounces up. And then what's in vogue? Like from the Enlightenment or the Renaissance to the Enlightenment period to, I think I said something like snobbish, aristocratic Victorianism decides like we're going to come up with this kick-ass system. Sorry, this kick-butt system to talk about these things, like, because it's also, there's something to the idea still of a sellout, right? Like I have something, here on that Christianity, that's cute. I've got the secret thing over here. What are you studying? Oh, well, it's this really old thing, and it's it must be more true because it's older. And we develop a system based on it, and it really births what we have today as an initiatory system, although probably not so concerned with the initiation as much anymore, right? But there are certain systems who still are.
Right.
Well,
but arguably,
and
like
to that point, Robert, if you're looking at it from a contextual point of view, as far as the Age of Enlightenment is concerned, and a return to Neoplatonic philosophy, you see, the idea of Neoplatonism was revolutionary in the sense that people themselves were responsible for being part of that divine and having that divine spark within them, whereas a lot of world religions, especially up until the Age of the Enlightenment with the Catholic Church and the Protestant Reformation, Christianity was very much a more of a spectator sport and much less inherently participatory. So when you look at Neoplatonism as saying, no, the divine and the ability to know the divine lies within you, that's a huge paradigm shift of, approximately, I want to say, over 1,000 years of dogmatic philosophy. It just turned on its head.
Yeah, and to build on that too, so what we're really talking about here is a shift towards Theosophy, with meaning that you can actually have some closeness or gnosis to the Creator, some flash of at least being able to experience the Creator in a much more one-on-one kind of way. It's not a passive act. And in addition, we also have Neoplatonism influencing. There was the other thought I had. Crap, and I just missed it. But they're consistent with. That is where they do share a commonality with the Gnostics, because they are trying to align some sort of gnosis with the divine. So I'll get my thought back, because it was a great point, I swear.
So I have a question, right? Like, as somebody who studies Christian theology purely on a historical and philosophical basis, one of the things that you said, Jason said, about flipping the whole script on the way this works. There's often a piece of scripture, and I'm just curious on both of your interpretations, both as a very historical and well-read. I would call Jason a theologian in Christianity for sure, and John, somebody who has studied the mystic art of Christianity for many years. When Jesus says, I'm paraphrasing, I'm the Son of God as you are all, or the Son of God, right?
Right.
This portion of scripture, seeing is okay. We'll say the year is zero. We'll say the year is 32 CE, and with Platonism getting its
At that point,
start,
he's already dead.
right? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, you're correct.
You need to back it up to about 30 CE.
All right, 30 CE. We'll say 30 CE.
Actually,
so
no, probably closer to 28.
Details.
Do you see this historical detail? This is important, though.
26 to 27 CE, when Jesus is approximately 30 years old and enters into his ministry. There you go.
Perfect.
Please
Thanks.
continue.
So 120 years prior, you have basically Platonism.
Right.
So is it possible that with that interpretation that starts to sound a little bit Neoplatonic, there's I'm trying to remember his name, Louis something. He's a professor and a priest, and he was lecturing in Russia. No, he was lecturing in Russia, and he said something to the effect of, it's not surprising that these different systems, although fought with each other over what was right, had similar thought processes because of the evolutionary state of the human mind.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if you think that's plausible, because obviously he's coming from a theological standpoint. But also, really, I guess my question is, if you think that quote is evident at all, that maybe Jesus of Nazareth was influenced at all by the Neoplatonic or Platonic movement, or if it was even in his area, I don't know.
So one thing that I'll jump in, because I've thought about this a lot, is it really becomes a chicken and an egg problem, right? If you believe in the true divinity of Jesus Christ, then he was before everything existed. So therefore, he invented it, right? Before even there was Platonic thought, Jesus was there. And so, yes, or you could look at it as you can look at specific theosophic Bible verses that kind of jump out and say, there's something a little bit more behind the curtain that you're not showing all your hands, right? Jesus was known to speak in parables, and so that quote, and there's two others that just came right to mind that I really like to think about is at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says at the very last line of text, he says, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." He doesn't say try to be perfect. He says be perfect. And so I'm like, that's union right there with the Creator. And then there's also one that I know Joe Martinez and I have talked about quite a bit, of the phrase that the kingdom of God lives within you. And so that doesn't leave much for interpretation. It's saying that the kingdom of God is here and lives within you. Even though Jesus spoke in parables, what is that trying to say? So you combined what you said, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, and the kingdom of God lives within you. It sounds an awful lot like the noose, like the gnosis, trying to get to live the virtues of the Creator right here, right now on Earth. And so, I mean, there's whether or not one, chicken or an egg, one inspired the other or one was influenced by the other. It doesn't matter because
That
there's a lot of similarity right there.
that
Or
sounds
it's
platonic.
It sounds
two
platonic.
two coincidental threads that draw toward the same conclusion. You see this in like the religions of the book, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Arguably, it is the same God. In a lot of religions, you have similar threads and similar archetypes. When you look at the historical Jesus, he was a carpenter out of Nazareth, hung out with fishermen. They were all illiterate, as 99% of the folks in Galilee and Nazareth were at the time. The training and the religious training that Jesus got was from the Jewish scholars and rabbis of the time. So either Platonic philosophy came in and influenced Judaism and the teachings of Judaism that came out through rabbinical philosophy at the time, and Jesus picked it up from there, or he is all-knowing and created the Platonic philosophy and was able to draw from that. Or, like we see in a lot of different religions, there are a lot of different places that draw the same conclusions almost independently of each other. It gets you back to the question of whether or not there is an overarching sense of truth that man can arrive at through various different journeys and paths without intersecting. Maybe.
Boom. There you go.
Those are the three options I see for the interpretation of how Jesus would have come by that philosophical knowledge.
So dumb it down for me. Those three options are: one, what?
Those three options are one, the philosophy pervaded into the Jewish teachings of the time. It influenced the Jewish teachings of the era and the time. Two, Jesus is omniscient. And three, there are certain transcendent truths at which folks can arrive independently of one another and independent of given philosophy or dogma.
Mm-hmm. So taking another spin. I remember my thought I was going to bring up earlier. So we talked about Theosophy, right, and union with the Creator, trying to do practices, meditative practices, prayer, and all that, so that you align yourself to aspects of the Creator. Also, in some of our research, there's been a trace of Neoplatonism into Theurgy, which is the practice and art of basically magic rituals to also either align yourself closer to the Creator or to bring down some of the aspects of the Creator to work some practical magic here on Earth as well. So there is a trace of different schools of thoughts that have evolved out of Neoplatonism about can you ascend or can you bring the noose down so that you can actually start applying it and using it here. So again, that's an interesting subject that's probably much more set aside for another topic about how theurgy evolved. But it is.
So we got to have a conversation then in the future about theurgy, power of thought, and the power of accepting a belief system to empower thought to be more powerful, to manifest.
To open vice constrain.
Oh, schneer.
Man,
so embracing embracing a philosophy or a dogmatic set of dogmatic assumptions or creeds as a lens to view, the world with perhaps a new perspective, as opposed to constraining your worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
All right.
Also, John, what you were talking about with Theurgy, that really gets back to the third point I was trying to make.
Okay.
Back a couple minutes ago, on those certain divine truths at which one can arrive, whether it's those truths coming down from the one or the being, or man reaching up to grasp those.
I love it. Good stuff. So that's all that I had prepared. And if there's anything else that you wanted to kind of wrap up with, Robert, you were talking a little bit in the green room about some of the books and some of the things that you've read and how it really starts to go even deeper. Do you want to touch on that as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can just give you a teeny bit. Maybe some guys can really look into it, but one of the sorry, I'm just looking at some of my notes here. There was a Platonic academy in Florence. Ficino and Pico de Mirandola both had studied there, and they built an occult art of memory into some kind of secret philosophies as a system while there. And it's really funny, they refer to it as the dark continent of memory. Was somebody who explored this idea was Giordano Bruno, who is very famous. A lot of dudes love the idea of Bruno because they know he's burned at the stake and all of these things. But study the man is really fascinating. So when Bruno was a young friar in Naples, Italy, he's admitted into this kind of secret school of memory called the Dominican Art of Memory. And then he abandons this Dominican order. And when he does so, people are thinking he's going to like reveal all of these secrets that they teach him about memory work. So what does this memory work have to do with a Platonic academy? Well, he writes this book called The Shadow of Ideas, which is like right around late 16th century, 1580s-ish. And it's, again, Shadows of Ideas. And in it, he kind of discloses some of the concepts. And he says, trying to remember how I translated this before. He basically says that if you study attentively these numbers in this way, which relate to images of the zodiac, you're able to reach a figurative art that will help not only your memory, but all of the powers of the soul in a wonderful, I think it's way, but it might be manner, in a wonderful manner. So he kind of alludes to this idea of a transcendent theology of understanding. And this is where you come into some of the ideas about the theology of arithmetic, where we're talking about understanding God through numbers, a finite thing. So in here, this starts to bring about the idea of looking at numbers as not just a way of explaining the wonders that you see around you day to day, but a way to physically really explain reality. And then we start to see that later on, with the works of quantum physicists today, Planck, or Planck, some people will say, or any number of physicists who basically try to discern God, like the 1-inch equation, for instance. It's really interesting stuff. I mean, Neoplatonism and Platonism have influenced today's not just religious systems. I mean,
right.
Religion, science, likelihood, my belief, same end goal, two ways of telling a story,
Right.
two paths, and I think really you know two things: Platonism and Neoplatonism has influenced anything we do today, even science, more than those systems.
No,
I
I
mean,
love
it's
it.
just like we owe so much to them. It would be hard to find something else that has impacted it.
Hmm. Well,
Green beans.
it's a great spot to jump off from and start to wrap things up.
Green
So
beans.
Neoplatonic green beans. That's funny. Let's go to final thoughts, shameless plugs, starting with Jason.
Oh wow. Fantastic episode. I love nerding out on philosophy. That's something I don't get to do enough of. Yeah, no real shameless plugs or final thoughts for me. Just a really great episode. Had a ton of fun researching it and nerding out on the chicken or the egg questions of what can we tell from as historians happened when and what originated when and who adopted and appropriated which concepts. It's just a big puzzle piece or a big puzzle that you get to put all the pieces into. So thanks everybody for watching. We've got a really fun show next week with a special guest, so it'll be a lot of fun. You're going to enjoy it.
I guarantee it.
Yeah.
You're going to like the way you look. I guarantee it. Let's jump over to Robert. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Just mind blown. I didn't. So most of my research through school and everything was on philosophy, and I always studied heavily Philo-Judaeus and Iamblichus and Socrates and Plato. Right? These guys who kind of were made their little chip, and I didn't know really the basics or any of the advanced stuff that Jason brought us with Plotinus. So big ups to Jason. Really appreciate it. And then just hearing the different perspectives here of the two of you specifically. I just had such a weird kind of tangential thought about early Christianity and how that may have impacted. So I want to thank you guys for your perspectives on that. That's really it. Whence came you? 9:30 Sunday nights. Whence came you? Masonic podcast. And I would just say I hope our Masonic brothers and sisters out there who listen to the program check out the Refracted Light Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
Masonic education has really taken over all of Masonry now. And once verified and you get into that group, I think you'll find some great educational topics. Guys like, tons
Jason
of great
Richards.
speakers are
Robert
tons
Johnson.
of great speakers.
John
Tons of great
Ruart.
speakers are talking every night. I mean, last week people had to make a choice.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh man, who am I going to watch tonight?" So it's just been fantastic, and I would just urge everybody to get over there if you're really interested in that stuff, and if you
yourself
pass your
a favor.
registration, get in. Yeah.
Do yourself a favor, and if you request access to the group, answer every single question, because if you don't, I am not going to let you in.
Jason with the band hammer.
That's right. You're not going to like the way you look.
Jason guarantees it.
Egg on your face. All right. That's all cool. I got. Thanks, guys.
Good stuff. Hey, yeah, this has been fascinating. I don't take the time to go all the way back to where a lot of this stuff comes from, because I am fans of a lot of the Renaissance era Christian thought of those that influenced St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas Agrippa, of course we talked about Pico de Mirandola. Like, these are all, they take the Christian aspect and kind of give it a little mystic taste. They give it a little twist. And so going all the way back to the roots and what influenced them. It's been a fascinating ride to go and unpack that and see where that came from and how it evolved over the centuries. And again, we're talking 2,000 plus years of thought and how it's evolved, and it's fascinating to see how we as you said earlier, Robert, we are stardust examining itself. We are the universe examining itself, and no one has it right, but we're getting a little bit better as we go through the millennia. And I think that's certainly a school of thought that we should continue in the Masonic tradition of. We'll never get to that perfect answer, but we'll always keep trying. And I think having discussions like this as we examine what life is about, why life is worth living, it gets us a little bit closer. And I thank you all for the experience to help me with that journey. So thank you guys, and thanks for all the discussion on Facebook and on YouTube. Even if we haven't been able to respond to them all, we're certainly reading them. I got my Facebook feed running along the bottom right here. So we see them all, and it's just been great to hear from all of you on what your aspects and what your insights in Masonry has been. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. So with that, that's all we've got. We hope you've enjoyed the program.
Is that your non-divine heart?
That is my non-divine.
The lower heart, as opposed to the
right.
divine higher heart.
It's the material world. It's not the.
I totally killed your outro. Probably just start over.
I'll allow it. So thank you very much for watching. I keep searching for more light. Have a good night.